computer. Okay, and now I'm going to go to live on Facebook. So wait until this fully, I'm not quite there yet. I will tell you when I'm there. Takes a moment. It's preparing. I will let you know. Okay, and now I'm looking at a preview, and now I'm hitting go live. And it's setting up for live. Hang on. Done. It says directing to Facebook Live. So, still spinning. Hang on one moment. Okay, we are now live. So, Irene, if you want to play the music.
Well, it's wonderful to see so many of you here. And we're delighted to have Irene Frielich back again, as I noted in some of the advertising, back by popular demand, because we all loved her first talk that she did about a year ago. Irene Frielich is the daughter of a German Holocaust survivor, but that wasn't talked about too much in her family home. She set aside the unspoken emotions that permeated her childhood and focused on her education, career, and family. She founded and manages a successful training consulting business, plays flute in a concert band, and volunteers with her synagogue. She loves to cook, entertain, hear good music, enjoy coffee with friends, and snowshoe. But it took her until 2017 to return to the unspoken journey of her family. Through her research and visits to Germany and the Netherlands, Irene was able to trace her family's escape on Kristallnacht from Nazi Germany to temporary safety in the Netherlands until the Nazi invasion. She also located and visited hometowns of ancestors she had never heard of until she began her research. And in a very exciting new bit of news, Irene is now an internationally published author. She recently had a small part of her father's story published in a Dutch book written as a memorial tribute on the 76th anniversary of liberation. The book was written as a tribute to all those who lost their lives in the war in a certain part of the Netherlands. Part of her father's story was translated from English to Dutch and is published in this book. And I do want to say she is working on publishing a book, writing the book and publishing one on her father's story. So thank you so much, Irene. We're delighted to have you with us this morning.
Thank you, Susie and Marilyn. I'm delighted to be here. I very much appreciate your invitation. And by the way, I don't think I'm doing any flute playing in a band anytime soon. So sadly, I don't know when that's going to happen again, but I look forward to that day. So as Susie mentioned, as was the case for many children of survivors, I lived most of my life holding secrets that I didn't know about. My father, in the center of this slide, was about 20 years old when he left the Netherlands and came to America. And the information that I gleaned from him was stuff I found mostly on my research. All I knew was that he escaped with his family on November 10th, 1938, the morning after what came to be known as Kristallnacht. He was 12 years old, and I knew he survived in hiding on the Lansing farm, which will come up again today, somewhere in Holland. My father died in 1994 when I was still a relatively young adult, so I never asked him the questions that I carried with him. I didn't want to cause him more pain, and I'm pretty sure he didn't want to cause me pain by telling me the stories. After he died, I held on to piles of photos and documents that he had saved. Many, I would come to learn, must have also been saved by his mother, my Oma, my grandmother, I called Oma, before that. I had no idea what some of these were until recently. My father made a testimony video that was sent to me around the time he died. I watched it once back then and put it away. Maybe someday I would get back to it. In 2017, just 2.5 years ago, I refound the video and transcribed it, Google mapping and Google searching places and names as he shared them. Together with the documents, research, and quite a bit of courage, I committed the unthinkable. I planned a family roots trip to Germany in June 2018. The focus was on finding my ancestral hometowns and then retracing my father's steps from Kristallnacht in Germany through liberation to Holland. Since that trip, I subsequently made 2 more trips to continue my research and to search for something more tactile, for the ability to touch and feel my father's life in some way. Last year at Temple Beth David, I shared my father's story from the years 1938 to 1945 and our work tracing his footsteps in the Nazi years. In today's presentation, I will share 3 separate stories, the most moving stories to me of my trip. The stories that are mine and my family's, but exist because of the information my father had left me and the research I've done. These are the stories about my return home. Let's head to Moit, Germany, about an hour northwest of Frankfurt. Moit is the town where my grandfather Moritz was born and ancestors lived for at least 200 years before him. It is a rural and bucolic town filled with rolling hills and a feeling of peacefulness. The old Rathaus, or town hall, dating from 1596, still exists, now as a pub. On our first visit to this town, we were connected with a seated man named Stefan. This is Josh, my oldest son, who's on the call today, Seth, my husband, who's also on the call, Stefan, seated, and me. Stefan had documented 2 chapters in this book, The 900-Year History of Moit. Specifically, he documented the chapters about the history and genealogy of all the Jews who had lived in the town. Here's a peek inside the book at the genealogy section of the Jewish families. At its height, in about 1905, 105 Jews lived in Moit, representing 13% of the population, which is actually a very high percentage. It turns out the Jews of the town consisted of 5 families, 4 of which were all descended from my 4th great-grandmother, Eva. And yes, that would make most of us descendants cousins. This is very common in Jewish genealogy. Stefan toured us around town and showed us this memorial to the synagogue that had been destroyed on Kristallnacht, November 9th to 10th, 1938. Stefan showed us Alexander and Fanny Stern's home. These were my great-grandparents. This is also the place where my grandfather Moritz was born. And Stefan took us to the cemetery where we found my 2nd great-grandfather Isaac's grave and Isaac's grandmother, my 4th great-grandmother, Eva's grave. Remember, Eva, born in the 1700s, is the matriarch of 4 of the 5 Jewish family lines from Moit. And by the way, of all the cemeteries we visited in Germany and the Netherlands, this was the only one that didn't require a key. In 1964, one of the town's descendants, Ludwig Falkenstein, he's in the fifth of those 5 families, returned to Moit. He reconciled with the townspeople who all remembered him, and he remembered them. Together, the town and this man ensured there would be memorials as well as triennial Kristallnacht ceremony, which continues to this day. It is for this ceremony that Josh and I returned in November 2018, just 5 months after our first visit. Seth wasn't able to join us that time. This is the memorial to the residents of Moit who were killed in the Holocaust. About 75 people came to Moit on this day in November 2018, descendants of the Jews of Moit. Most of us, therefore, are cousins. The mayor and the town of Moit hosted us for the day. This was early that morning in the town hall. As we arrived, they had breakfast waiting for us. We were later served lunch, and after afternoon, we were served coffee and cake. All these seats were filled. During the event, Josh and I walked around the room meeting our cousins, asking which family line they were from and where they live. We met cousins from Switzerland, Netherlands, England, Israel, New Jersey, California, and even as far away as Brazil. After lunch, we all headed toward the cemetery. The mayor spoke in German. I'm going to play a short clip of that.
Liebe Moiter Mitbürgerinnen und Mitbürger, ich begrüße Sie alle zu dieser diesjährigen Gedenkveranstaltung am Volksbrauertag hier.
Could everybody hear that? Marilyn, let me know if you couldn't hear that. Okay. So that was in German. I don't really understand German, but Stefan had translated the speech into English. And Stefan's English is not really fluent. He had to, when we spent time with him, he kept looking up words in his Google, as he said, which was his little pocket dictionary. It was very funny and very sweet. But what's really interesting is that the mayor's speech included these words. He said, "We see this triennial commemoration as a mission and a legacy, as a reminder for all misery and horror that happened during the Nazi period in Germany and in Europe. We also set an example, however only a little example, against right-wing populists, who in the meantime are represented in all state parliaments and in the German Bundestag, and who try to split our society. Right-wing populists are very popular not only in Germany, but also in almost all countries in Europe, and also in the United States and in Brazil." Mayor Zeiss closed with this call to action. "I ask all of you to sustain your efforts to raise your voice against aggression and expressions of hatred." So this was a year and a half ago that we were hearing him speak about this. It was very moving. At the cemetery, 2 clergy spoke and a band and a chorus played. You might have noticed the sound of the wind in the background when I was playing the mayor's speech. It was very cold and very windy on this November morning or afternoon. Afterwards, Ludwig Falkenstein's son, the man who reconciled with the townspeople, he said some words. And then cousin Ted Tobias chanted this. When Ted recited the special El Malay Rachamim prayer, I was caught by surprise. I knew this was the traditional prayer chanted at memorial services. I just hadn't expected to hear it recited here in Germany. Meanwhile, I just need to adjust something. Because I was fiddling with this and it's a little too big for me. Sorry about that.
Sorry, that was my,
Is it more easily viewable now?
No, it's fine. I think I thought that it would take the headers out, and it didn't, so you could go back to the way it was before.
Okay.
I apologize. Sorry,
That's all
folks.
right.
Just
That's all right. Just give me one second then, please. Afterwards, I walked through the 6 lit candles to the Holocaust Memorial to view the wreaths that had been laid there. This was the first time for me on the second day of my second trip to Germany that left me with a feeling of hope and of the understanding that Germans in some places are working hard to remember and to ensure that that atrocities never happen again. There are no Jews living in Moit today, nor have there been any since 1943. But real people in the town of Moit, people with a passion, are working to keep the history and memory alive. Yet, as in most stories, it is not so clear-cut. Now I need to, there we go. Okay. My great-grandparents that I mentioned earlier, Alexander and Fanny, had moved along with the youngest of their children, including my grandfather Moritz, to nearby Montabaur. It was a larger town than Moit, with about 117 Jews living there in 1905. Alexander and Fanny are buried in the Montabaur Cemetery. The closest of my cousins at the Moit event are my second half cousins, Gerald and his sister Tina. We share Alexander as our great-grandfather, though our great-grandmothers were 2 different wives, both of them interestingly named Fanny. Josh and I got a good laugh out of that. It was thanks to Gerald and Tina that I was able to connect to the towns of Moit and Montabaur. It was in this town of Montabaur that my family stayed on our first visit in the castle turned hotel at the top of the mount. On our second visit, I had this idea that I wanted to get as close to touching my family's history as possible. I wanted to stay in an authentic old half-timbered house near the old Jewish neighborhood. Josh and I stayed in this Airbnb find. Unlike the welcome given the Jews returning to Moit, neighboring Montabaur took a while to mark the memory of murdered and displaced Jews. This simple plaque marks the location of the synagogue that was destroyed in Montabaur on Kristallnacht. It is in front of what is now a bank only recently built over the excavated land where rubble from the synagogue was found. I had taken some pieces of the old synagogue for placing at the gravestones I would visit, but I forgot, and I have them in my living room to this day. My cousin Gerald had spent his own funds and 10 years of effort to have this Holocaust memorial approved by the town of Montabaur. It was erected in 2013 and stands in front of the town hall. Cousin Gerald had connected us with a local historian, Paul, the man in this photo, who helps educate people about the history of the Jews of Montabaur. Because of his connection to the town, Cousin Gerald set up a meeting for us with the mayor. She only had 5 minutes for us, but made a point to see us. Here we are, cousins and historians, awaiting the mayor in the Rathaus conference room. I was here with such conflicting emotions. You see, the night before this meeting, lying in the bed of my Airbnb, the one I showed you earlier, the one I imagined might have been slept in by Jewish people in the early 1900s, perhaps even distant family members, I awoke from a vivid dream. There was a man sitting at the window watching me sleep, gloating at me for sleeping in his room. But he wasn't a distant cousin. He wore a Nazi uniform. I froze under the covers, not moving and barely sleeping the rest of the night. I was shaken to the core. In the morning, Josh and I had made the cold and windy walk to the town hall to meet our cousins and the mayor. As we waited in the conference room for the mayor to arrive, Josh and Gerald's wife, looked at the photos of the mayors of the town going back over 100 years. They were curious who the mayor was from 1938 to 1945. Mysteriously, no photos covered those years, and there was no note in place of the photos to acknowledge what happened during those years. When the mayor arrived, we asked her what the town does to commemorate Kristallnacht, sharing the moving day we had just had in Moit. There are other commemorations, the mayor told us, and it is not possible to do it all. The town was more focused on marking the end of World War I in 1918 and the reunification of Germany in 1989, both around the same dates as Kristallnacht. That said, there is a cemetery, there are memorials, and the old Jewish neighborhood regained its designated name, Judengasse, as another way to remember. But no Jews have lived in Montabaur since 1941. So I'm going to just pause now before going to the next story to see what questions we have on this topic. Did current residents come to the memorial? Yeah, there were quite a few people in the town of Moit that came to that memorial service. It's a pretty big town event. And it's a small town, so yeah, there were some. Are there any other questions about that section, that story?
Yeah. Enter any questions into the chat. I checked Facebook, there are none over there.
Okay, so I will continue, but feel free to keep writing in your questions if you think of something. Our next part of the journey takes us to the Netherlands. Why the Netherlands? Well, as a summary, my father and his family fled their Bocholt, Germany home on Kristallnacht on November 1938. They escaped across the border to the Netherlands and eventually moved to Enschede to live with family. The Nazis invaded about 1.5 years later. In May 1940, my grandfather was arrested immediately. That left my father, his mother, that's my Oma in the middle of the left picture, and his grandmother. In October 1942, there was another roundup in the Jews of Enschede. My grandmother, my Oma, hired a smuggler to take them into hiding. They were taken to the Lansing farm where Vader Lansing, that's like father, not like Darth Vader, although it could be the same word. Father Lansing and his adult son Gerhard and daughter Mina hid them in an attic above a barn. I talked about this a bit in my last presentation at Temple Beth David. They were hidden in approximately this area of the building, where we visited in 2018. There they remained in hiding for 2.5 years, not knowing yet that Moritz and almost the entire family who hadn't left Europe had perished. After liberation, it seems clear that Vater Lansing and my father and Oma remained close. I love this photo on the left. When I was a child, I knew my father wrote letters to the Lansing family. And my father visited the Netherlands in 1991. He met Gerhard's son, I call him Jan Jr., his name is also Jan, and his family. My father hosted a dinner for them and brought gifts for everyone, gifts the children still remember receiving some 30 years later. In the video my father made of the visit, he mentioned the rosaries he brought for the family in Israel. He seemed very proud of that gift. During the visit, Jan Jr. took my father back to places that my father had been in the Netherlands. Jan Jr. seemed to regret, when I talked to him, that my father refused to enter Germany, even though they stood together at the border where my family had crossed into the Netherlands in 1938. They stood there together in 1991. When my father died in 1994, I had no way of remaining in touch with the Lansing family and only had their name. Until I started my research. I must have shared the Lansing name with one of my new Dutch contacts in the area. He decided to start making phone calls, and on the first call, he contacted our Jan Lansing Jr. So we first met Jan Jr. at his home in June 2018. Here is my Dutch contact, Jan Jr. in the pink shirt, my brother and sister-in-law, who hopefully are on the Facebook Live, hi guys, with me. And our contact was able to translate for us because Jan Jr. doesn't speak much English. Remember, our Jan's father was Gerhard and his grandfather was Jan Sr., Vater Lansing. Jan Jr., by the way, he's about 70, so he was born after the war. I wanted to bring Jan and his wife a meaningful gift. I found a beautiful wooden box with a tree of life engraved in the cover. I handed it to him in the gift bag. As Jan pulled it out, his wife Wilma watching, he immediately started crying. We all were crying. We didn't know why yet. He went to a nearby hutch and pulled out a wooden box that holds rosaries. My father had given him these rosaries, he told me, in this box with a tree carved into it. I had no idea about the box. We visited with Jan on all 3 of our trips. I feel like we are soul cousins, as though our families are meant to be connected. I can't explain it, but the feeling is so powerful. We also met his daughter on our 2 subsequent visits. His daughter, who was a child at the time of my father's visit and finally remembered the gifts that they got. We also met his son, Michel, and granddaughter, Aliki. Michel had tears in his eyes during our conversation and said he would be proud to tell Aliki the story of the heroes of her family. I will be glad to help tell that story, as my father told Jan Jr., who did not know the details of how generous and courageous his own father, aunt, and grandfather had been. For our 3rd visit, I had invited Jan, our Jan Jr., to attend the memorial stone laying that would happen late that week in my father's German hometown. He said he couldn't make it, and that saddened me. It seemed to me he needed to be there. So I'm going to pause here. That was a shorter story about our relationship with the Lansing family. And just reading comments. Yes, that was a very vivid dream I had, Joel. It was so real. And Abby, why did the family move from Moit to Montabaur and then to Bocholt? The family moved from Moit to Montabaur because it was a slightly larger town and there were more opportunities. Business opportunities for Jews were pretty limited historically in Germany. So Montabaur gave them a little more freedom to pursue their leather working business. It was a big leather town. They were known for making shoes. Moritz was the one who had ultimately moved to Bocholt, and he did it for business purposes. He eventually signed a business agreement with the man who would become his father-in-law. And a few months, like 2 months after he signed the business agreement to become owner of the store, he married my grandmother. So thank you for those questions. So now let's move on to Bocholt, my father's hometown. You can see it is right on the border with the Netherlands. So I will say, you just heard that Moritz came to town in 1926, basically, and my father was born later that year. But my Oma had been born in that town in 1902. Her parents had come to this big, centrally located, because it's on the border, centrally located town of Bocholt in about 1900 or 1901. How many hours of research went into those stories? I don't even know. I do have a full-time job, so it wasn't, I don't know. Ask my husband. Maybe Seth, you can say how many hours of research went into the stories. So these words of my father's from his testimony video rang in my ears throughout my research as I planned each trip to Germany, and especially as I entered the town of Bocholt all 3 times. I am going to...
I have never gone back to Germany. I will never go back to Germany. I will not give them the satisfaction or for my own pride. I just wouldn't do it. I couldn't.
So I was very conflicted about my own return, but I went. It took until our second visit that we were received by the town. This was right after that triennial Kristallnacht ceremony in Moit that I shared earlier. The town of Bocholt actually paid for Josh and my hotel stay, and they received us for dinner in the hotel restaurant. Josh is on the left, and Hani Kamler, the deputy mayor, is just to the right of me. I'll tell you about the others in a few minutes. During the dinner, Mrs. Kamler shared some words with us about the history of Bocholt. Her words included these: "It is our generation which has the duty to pass the memory of the incidents which happened during World War II to the next generation. We have to do everything to prevent the future from repeating such outrages which were done in the Holocaust." We were celebrities in the Bocholt Town News after the reception. This was on their website the following morning. Very exciting. One of the things I was trying to accomplish in this meeting was a commitment to the laying of Stolpersteine. Stolpersteine are brass plates about 3 inches by 3 inches, and they fit into the ground in place of cobblestones. There are now 70,000 of them across Europe, positioned in front of the last willful residence of the person they are memorializing. On the right are 2 Stolpersteine we found when we visited one of my ancestral hometowns a few hours from Bocholt. They are from my Oma's aunt and cousin. I'll say their names, Aunt Dina and Cousin Alice. The Stolpersteine project was started by this man and an artist named Günter Demnig as a way to remember Holocaust victims. Usually, one needs to work through the town to have the stones laid, and usually Günter attends the stone layings himself. The bureaucracy was difficult for me to navigate, but the town assured me at the dinner reception that the stones, 2 of them, one for each who were killed in the Holocaust, my grandfather and my great-uncle Kurt, would be laid. I requested one be laid for my great-grandmother, who died right after liberation, but they told me that would not be possible. They also told me an anonymous donor contributed the money for the laying of the stones, about $130 each stone. The morning after the town's reception, we had an appointment with these men: Herman, a former history teacher at the St. Georg Gymnasium, or the St. George High School, the local high school, and Josef Niebuhr, the man who researched and compiled a short biography of each of the 175 Jews who were born in Bocholt or living in Bocholt at the start of the war and had been killed during the Holocaust. Erica, I think a different Alice Sternberg, but you just got me very excited for a moment. Okay, wow, that would have been awesome. But Alice didn't have any kids, as far as I know. This book is 500 pages long. I wish I could show it to you in person because it's quite momentous. And it includes information about my own grandfather and my great uncle. Josef is severely handicapped, and Herman has been helping him. In the meeting at Josef's apartment, together they asked me questions about my Oma's story. This was unexpected. I realized partway through that I was giving my Oma's testimony as best as I had pieced together. They know the history of my family members who were killed, but not what happened to my father and Oma who survived. I can't describe how moved I was in that moment speaking for my Oma, not feeling quite right about it, and yet feeling like it was the right thing to do. Monica, the other person who joined us for the dinner reception, also came to the meeting in which I gave my Oma's testimony. In fact, she wrote up the story in German and sent it to me. Now, I'd like to take a little detour because I feel compelled to share the story of Monica. Our meeting was incredibly serendipitous. but it had to happen. And I'm going to just ask you to put in chat if anybody in this call, other than my husband and son, know Monica and brother, because you met her too. Does anybody know who Monica is? All right, nobody. Well, let me tell you about Monica. So I need to give a little backstory to this. On our first trip to Bocholt, I had brought this photo with me. I believe it is my father's 5 or 6 year old. Just as we were leaving our visit with the town archivists, I showed them this photo and asked about the building. The archivist immediately recognized it as St. Georg Gymnasium, the local high school. I thought nothing more about it, just happy to learn that what the location was and that it was a place in Bocholt. It was later that day that we were visiting the old Jewish cemetery here, under the building, outlined in black dots. This is a photo taken from Josh's drone. The details of how we came to this place and why the cemetery is under a building are details for another time. But I'll tell you, I was deeply saddened. I needed to walk it off, and so we walked around the block, and we happened upon this building. Actually, we ended up right here in front of a sign that said St. Georg Gymnasium. We couldn't resist taking a photo of Josh standing in the same spot as my father. We compared bricks and doorways and realized this is exactly the same building. Perhaps the facade was cleaned or the detail of the photograph itself was a little different, but it was the same exact building. We had to be here, right? So we made our way to the office. The ladies were delighted to see the photo of my father, and the tallest lady got on her step stool and reached into this cabinet to pull out a book of the graduates from this school from the years 1887 to 1929. I knew she wouldn't find any of my family members in the book, but she was so excited to search. Then they said, let's get Monica. She would love to talk with you. And Monica speaks English, so we could communicate more easily. Monica toured us around the school to their school museum, their schoolrooms set up with old science instruments that Self helped her identify, and to the stairwell filled with photos and articles about Bocholt's history. But most remarkably, I learned that Monica is the coordinator of the U.S. School Exchange Program with the town of Canton, Massachusetts. And for those watching on Facebook Live, Temple Beth David is in Canton, Massachusetts, and it is the neighboring town to Sharon. In fact, we found this plaque in the school's office. I met with Monica twice a few months later in Canton at Ruta's for coffee, along with Elsa Nikolovius, the retired Canton High School teacher who had started the exchange program 40 years ago. The other time, Monica came to my home. I don't know for certain, but I do wonder how much Monica had to do with connecting me with the town who received us, connecting me with Joseph, or advocating for the Stolpersteine. I do know that she is a strong and present force in a lot of my Bocholt storytelling. 3 months after the November trip, I received word that the Stolpersteine were set to be laid in June and that there would be 5 of them. It turns out the stones are now laid not just for those who were killed, but for those who were displaced as well. We had visited the location of my family's pre-1938 home and business each of the 3 times we came to Bocholt. It has been owned by the Fisser family since 1938, since pretty much a month after my family fled Bocholt. I had met Johann Fisser, the current day owner, and his sister on the prior 2 visits. This is the photo we took during our first trip. If you attended my presentation last year, you might remember that it was Johann and Nina's ancestor who obtained, or I now know, purchased this home and business from my family in 1938. It is still in the Fisser family. So this photo shows both sets of siblings, Nina and Johann, David and me, descended from neighbors of each other who lived in this building at different times and worked in this building at different times. We arrived in Bocholt on our third visit for another reception by the town. Again, the town put up my family and my brother's family in a hotel and hosted a dinner for us. In addition to my family, 2 sets of friends joined us. They couldn't understand why we would return for a third time, no less, to Germany. In addition to wanting to support me in this difficult journey, they were curious themselves. Another amazing thing happened. After the dinner reception, Josh announced his engagement to our family and friends. Some in our group spontaneously started singing a Hebrew song of congratulations, and we all joined in, except for me. I couldn't sing through the tears, which will come now. Happy for Josh, and even more moved that this song had probably not been sung in this town. In the building next to where the synagogue had once been, in a town where there were no Jews, perhaps in 80 years. The following morning, about 80 people congregated outside my family's former home and business. People included the mayor, local dignitaries, new friends from the area, Monica and students, Josef and Hermann, and Johann Fisser, who owns the store, in front of which the stones would be placed. And who recognizes our surprise attendee? Jan Jr. and his wife Wilma surprised us. They brought 5 white roses, 1 for each stone. After the mayor spoke, we unveiled the stones, and my brother joined me. Then he chanted the El Malay Rahamim prayer in memory of those who died during the Holocaust. Oh, did not mean to do that. So that was us singing Esa Enai. That's how we started out this presentation. It's part of Psalm 121. We sang it in English, Hebrew, and German. Here, the mayor is the first to pay respect at the stones. The town had agreed to arrange for a professional photographer and videographer to record the stone laying. I'm going to show you one small part of it, since the video does a much better job of conveying the impact of this part of the event that I would like to share. I'm just going to cue it up.
Al mishkavoseihem v'namar amen.
The full video is about 5 minutes long, and if you're interested in seeing it with the subtitles that I had put in, I added a link to the chat, and if you're on Facebook Live, just let me know or let Marilyn know, and I'll send you the information. During our trip planning, So I was interviewed during this morning event. Jan was interviewed. Here is Jan and his wife with our family. And this includes not just my brother and sister-in-law, but some of their children as well. And Jan and Wilma with the kids. Jan looking at Sam, my niece. I didn't realize until later that this photo echoed Jan Sr. looking at my Oma 75 years ago. Remember that moment Jan laid the flowers with my brother and me? In that moment, I was bursting with emotion, feeling, honestly, this was probably the fourth most amazing moment of my life after my wedding and the birth of my two sons. It might be the fifth now after Josh's marriage to Adam. I didn't want to freak anyone out by saying any of that. Instead, I wrote a note to Jan's daughter, Eveline, who has been my go-between interpreter with her parents. I told her how moved and thankful I was that her father was able to be there. Eveline wrote back to me, "My parents were very emotional about Bocholt. My father said, my marriage," this is what she wrote, "my marriage," he said to her, "was a great day of my life. The birth of my children was a great day, but also this day." It was very special and emotional for him and my mother. Thank you very, very much. Again, we had our few days of fame. We were in the paper, even mentioned on a Bocholt Facebook page. And now my family's names are forever set among the cobblestones in front of the location of their once home, in the place where the glass from their storefront window lay shattered on the morning of November 10th, 1938, as the family drove past that spot on their way to Holland. This emotional day didn't end there. It was quite a long day. During our trip planning, the town had eagerly accepted my request to present my family's story to the town in their library media center. And that's what I did later that evening. The fact that we were presenting in this building, the former train depot, was itself synchronistic. If you recall the photo of my family from Moit, where I pictured Alexander and Fanny and their children, one of the children was my Aunt Matilda. Actually, here's the picture for you. There's Aunt Matilda. She was visiting my family overnight on November 9th to 10th, 1938. She had come to tell them that she and her family were leaving for America soon. Early in the morning of Kristallnacht, Aunt Matilda escaped Bocholt to return to Frankfurt. She came to this location to catch her train. And yes, she and her family did survive, making it to America in 1939. I knew her well when I was a little girl. I said that I presented my family's story, but actually, my father, via the audio from his testimony video, helped me with the presentation. I brought him, his voice, back into his hometown, to the place he vowed never to return. But I had to do this. The Germany of today is a different place than it was even in the 80s. Talking openly with curiosity and empathy about the trauma of families, the real stories, the complexities of the lives of Germans and Jews of the 1930s and 40s, and the complexities of lives of their children is critical to moving forward. No one is excusing the past, but we must come together and talk about the past and how it informs the future. Through my ongoing journey, I have come to understand that it is not clear-cut. Everyone, including Johann Fisser's family, the current owner of my family's former home and business, has a story. There is deep richness in exploring the gray areas. I managed to get through the presentation without crying, but looked out on the crowd periodically. I noticed more than a few tears. I feel my father would understand my need to bring him back to his hometown. I feel he would appreciate that I am trying to make a difference in healing my own family's inheritance of trauma, and he might even understand my mission to share this work publicly. Here is how I ended my presentation in Bocholt. This was a year ago. I wrote this over a year ago, after telling of my father's and his family's life during the war years, and of the 18 people who helped enable them to survive. Sadly, now it is as relevant as ever. And now more than ever, since this story took place, we must stand up and speak out against statements of intolerance and acts of hate. Let's not allow ourselves to be passive nor to be complicit. I encourage all of us to perform our own acts of courage, compassion, and kindness. We can talk to someone who we think is different than us. We can show genuine interest in one another. We can reconcile with those whom history has separated. We can make it happen. In this spirit, let us together honor the memory of the many individuals who demonstrated courage, compassion, and kindness to help my father and Oma to survive and make it possible for me and my family to be here today to share this story with you. Thank you so much, and I will open it to questions now.
Are people comfortable if we unmute and people can ask their questions verbally? Let me go back to my participants. Hold on.
I typed the wrong email into the chat. Thank you, Seth, for telling me. It's Irene Frielich at Gmail. I'm missing the L on the Gmail. I'll type it again so you'll have it. There's one question about this emblem, which, right, had nothing, it did not come up at all in this presentation. It does in the initial presentation. So this is a photograph of a wooden circular half-domed pin, brooch, that is about 1.5 inches in diameter. My father painted it while he was in hiding. He had said in his testimony video that he painted many of these brooches with Dutch emblems of national unity on them. And he went in the streets of the area right after liberation and sold them to people who were very happy to buy them. He must have kept this one, and he gave it to me as a gift when I fasted on Yom Kippur for the first time. I was about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old. I was young. And I didn't quite understand the importance of it, but I wore it proudly, and I have kept it close to me always, not really understanding its full significance. It says Tikvat Yisrael on it, which means hope of Israel. And it symbolizes to me that he must have carried this hope with him through that 2.5 years in hiding every day, hoping that one day he would be free.
If anybody else has a question and would like to ask, I'm going to scroll through the gallery, so just like raise your hand. There's also a hand raising function somewhere, but I haven't. Okay, Jeff has a question. Go ahead, Jeff.
It's not so much a question. I just wanted to let people know there was a book just published recently. I read it, called Dutch Girl, which was about the life of Audrey Hepburn when she was a young girl who was caught up in the Holocaust in Arnhem, and how she and her mom survived. And her mom was very much a fascist and supported the Nazi cause. And only later on, after the Nazis came in, did she change her attitude and left that kind of thinking. But Audrey Hepburn had to deal with all those things. She almost starved to death and so on. It's a very interesting book about that area and that history. So I thought I'd just mention it. It's called Dutch Girl.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? I'm just scrolling.
I just posted my Facebook page for Shattered Stars Healing Hearts. So if you're interested in kind of following periodic posts about the story or things I'm doing, feel free to follow the link that I just posted into the Zoom chat.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, as a follow-up, I will be able to post those. I've copied them off. I'll be able to post those onto our member page. So folks who either are here and didn't copy the link or weren't able to come can also have access to those resources too.
There's a
Thank
question
you.
from Joyce in the chat that I'll read out. She says, you said the people who bought my family's store, the relationship was very strained. Did you get to have a conversation with them? One of the most moving conversations and moments of all of this work was on my second trip when Josh and I sat down for coffee with Johann Fisser, and I put a pile of photographs in front of him of the home before it was his home, and he looked at every single one of them. He got out his flashlight to look very closely at the details of the photos, and he had tears in his eyes. And then he told us just a little bit about his own grandfather's story, which he did not know a lot about, but he was a prisoner of war in Siberia, and it was brutal there. And that kind of shifted me a little bit to truly realize that there are two sides. There are many sides to this story, but I was not brought up to think that way about it. And so that moment for me was amazing. So Johann and I are now Facebook friends. Not that we talk often or anything, but we are Facebook friends. So that's really interesting. I'm not sure how my grandmother would feel about that, but I'm proud of that. So thank you for the compliments that people are writing.
Okay.
There are several comments on the Facebook Live chat as well. I don't know if you can toggle over to that just to see the comments and whatnot, but they're lovely.
Thank you, everyone. I'm glad that you were able to watch on Facebook and on Zoom. And I'm happy to share any parts of my story with any groups that would like to hear about it. The more I talk about it, it's almost like therapy for me, but I really love sharing the story because it is one of reconciliation in many ways and healing. I'm still in that process, but it is a story of healing.
I have one question. Do you have plans for your next journey and what you hope to discover?
Joel just asked the same questions.
Okay.
I so hope to be able to return to Germany soon, when all of this other stuff is over. I have made so many friends in Germany and also in the Netherlands, people I want to go back and see. I would love to take my, the rest of my family and friends, whoever is interested on, I call it the Stern walking tour of Bocholt and the escape route. We know every point that my father was over the first 20 years of his life until he came to America, including the farm, the exact farm where he crossed the border, where they lived right after they were arrested when they crossed the border. We've been in the attic, and it's just really amazing to be able to do that. So my realistic hope would be to return to Germany for the next triennial Kristallnacht ceremony in Moit, which will be in 2021. So we'll see, and spend time with all these people when I go back.
Wonderful. Susie has her hand up, or her virtual hand.
I've been crying for the past 5 minutes into this. I just thank you so much, Irene, and I'm just struck by, the actions that you've been able to take, given what we're living in right now in this country, and talking about reconciliation. I mean, with the Black community, it's just astounding to me, the similarities and the moment we're living in, and the courage that it took for you to do this. I just wanted to ask you to update people, to talk a little bit about the book that you're writing about this,
Mhm.
because I want people to know that you're doing that. So can you talk a little about that?
Yes. I just want to say about the first part of your comment. I am struck by the similarities, but I am also struck by the differences. One of the things that struck me about Germany was that people talk about it. I mean, the groups of people that I was in touch with, they talk about it, they memorialize things. It's part of their school curriculum. They don't sweep it under the rug. They don't pretend like everything's okay now, like it never happened. They feel a sense of shame, even though they weren't the people who did this, right? It's their ancestors or their ancestors' neighbors. They just feel a collective sense of shame. And I think that's kind of missing here in this country. And that's part of the problem. We're not really getting it. So maybe we're moving towards that. I hope so. So I've been working on this book for a long time now, since the second trip, when I had so many incredibly, really life-changing moments in that trip. And I realized I had to write a book. For some reason, something was driving me to have to do it. I had no option. So here I am trying to learn the fine craft of writing, which I am not very good at. I'm taking classes and struggling through that and trying to bring my father's story and my story, discovering his story, come to life in a way that people would enjoy or want to read. So hopefully that book will come out one day, and I will definitely let you know when it does. Thank you, Susie, for bringing that up.
There's one more question in the chat, this probably would take more time than you have, but it's from Lewis Stone, to say a word about the 18 people who helped the escape.
Yeah, so the 18 people are basically the whole first presentation, which precedes this one. And so I know Lou has heard the story, but for those who haven't, that first part of the story I tell about each of the people I've identified, most of them by name, who did either a little brave thing or a huge courageous thing, like the Lansing family, to help my family survive. So that story goes through my father's escape and survival. And I'd be happy to present that again at any time if people miss that or want to hear it again even.
Great.
Thank you for asking that, Lou.
Well, thank you so much. This was fantastic. And, you know, even in the age of needing to watch these things remote, it actually makes it very immediate, you know, because we can see the screen right there. We can see each other's reactions and whatnot. So thank you so much for coming to join us, and we're delighted to have you. And we may very well ask you to return and either redo or tell us about your next journey.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everybody's
Thank you.
interest.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for a wonderful
Bye.
presentation.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.